What can happen because of a podcast? Or more specifically, what can happen because of my podcast? That's what I was asking myself about 5 years ago when I started the Engaging Missions show. I had some ideas of what I'd hoped would happen, but what actually happened really surprised me. What's happening, podcasters? This is 1000 Podcasters, and I'm Brian Ensminger. I'm a podcaster and a podcast editor, and I want to see you be successful with your podcast. This post is day 3 of a 30-day challenge to become a better host. The gauntlet was dropped by David Hooper over at bigpodcast.com, and it's also part of National Podcast Post Month. If you have a podcast, you probably started out with some sense of purpose. There was maybe some change that you wanted to see in the world, or some kind of benefit that you'd see, that you'd hoped you'd see. Maybe you were hoping to get super rich and never work another day in your life. The truth is, I don't know. When I started the Engaging Missions show, I definitely had some things that I wanted to see happen. One in particular was that I wanted to see missionaries have a chance to share their stories on another platform and to be able to create connections. And that shaped the direction and the format of my show, and it was certainly a main goal. But I had some other goals, or perhaps some hopes, too. I hoped that the show would support itself and maybe even lead to something that would support my family. But I didn't have a clear path to get there. So when I started off my show, I had a budget of whatever I'd set aside. I think it was about $250. And I had the agreement with my wife that if there wasn't a way to pay for the show, it was going to stop. As I was coming up on about the 9-month mark, the money was starting to get scarce, and I was starting to get a little bit worried. I'd been careful with what I'd spent, but there was only so much money to go around, and at the time, the show wasn't bringing in any money, and so it also wasn't leading to any money. So I was starting to wonder if I was going to need to shut it down. About that time, I interviewed Paul from Donor Elf. It's a business that has some software that supports missionaries, and he ended up hiring me for some copywriting because of the copy that I'd written for my show. As it turns out, I wasn't a stellar copywriter for other people, so that didn't last very long, but I was able to do some work that helped him out, provided him with some website copy that was really valuable, and it also helped help cover the cost of the show for a few more months. During that time, I kept the show going, and I was able to meet some other great people, even find some ways to improve the show. I upgraded the intro and the outro. I started adding some segments and other audio elements. I even had a previous guest, Scott McClelland, who had a background in radio, start producing a short segment for the show. It was called the FX Missions Leadership Minute at the time. And we were putting that in as part of the show just as an extra thing, an extra segment. Then, as we were coming up on about the 18-month mark, it was clear that the money that I was making, or the money that I had, was about to run out. I had some ideas that I was hoping would lead to some income as well as some mutual benefits. And the idea that I had that I thought might be valuable and also lead to some income was the idea of providing care packages for missionaries for some small profit on my side. So the idea was that I would put together some things that missionaries might benefit from, and then people that cared about them might be able to buy those. I'd get a small profit. They'd be able to provide something valuable. So I did the research on that. Did a little bit of testing, and I discovered that not only wasn't there any interest in this, but the cost of shipping was cost prohibitive. In fact, in most cases, the cost of shipping would have been more than just the cost of the product. So as I was looking at that, I thought, well, that's not going to be a great idea. And I was really starting to think, okay, it's about 18 months, and I thought again, maybe this time the show is going to come to an end. But about that time, my pastor came to me and asked if I would be interested in transitioning from being a volunteer webmaster for our church's website to managing a couple of websites as well as some social media accounts and writing the weekly email newsletter on a part-time basis and a few other things. It wasn't a lot of money, but when I looked at that and I thought, well, this could help cover the cost of the podcast. And so I was able to do that, picked up that work, did that work, and helped to keep the podcast going. As all of this was going along, Scott, who had been producing the Leadership Minute, asked if it would be possible to turn his short segments into a standalone short-form podcast in its own right. So we chatted about the details, we got him all set up, and that's what launched me into editing shows for other people. He'd been providing these segments, they'd been mixed into my show, but now I was editing his show. That was a great experience for me because it really forced me to grow as an editor and as a producer. It was part of the catalyst for me to attend Chris Curran's podcast engineering school, where I learned a lot and picked up some software. And it definitely provided me with the opportunity to hone my craft. As I look back on some of these experiences, the copywriting, the market research for a failed idea, the website and email management, as well as my foray into editing, a lot of this stuff was pretty unexpected. Some of these were really unexpected outcomes, and some of them had outcomes that that weren't as good as I'd hoped. Some of them I never even saw coming until they happened. Nearly everything that I had in my head at the very beginning has fallen by the wayside. Not quite everything, because the main goal is still there. I still want to do that, and the show is still providing for itself, and at this point, it's actually providing more. It's providing for my family, at least a little bit for my family as well. But the things that I've picked up along the way have been incredibly valuable and are now ways that I also generate money. So, this website stuff, editing podcasts, all of that kind of stuff helps support my habit of podcasting. It also supports my habit of buying podcasting equipment and software, and it also helps provide for my family. All of these pale, though, to something that I barely could have hoped would have happened. I've heard from people who were about to quit what they felt called by God to do tell me that they were able to keep going because of something that they heard a guest share on my show. It wasn't my story. It wasn't my plan. It was just a question that I asked that gave that guest the opportunity to share something that answered a question or gave perspective or provided the hope that they needed. It's more than I ever could have imagined would happen because of my show, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. What about you, though? If you already have a podcast, what would you have hoped to see happen because of your podcast? What were your goals and your dreams? And if you don't, what would you like to see happen because of your podcast? I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm Top Tier Audio, and you can let me know there what you were hoping would have happened or what you do hope will happen because of your podcast. And if you'd like to join this challenge, this daily challenge, visit bigpodcast.com/subscribe. It's not my challenge, but you can do it alongside me, and I'd love to connect with you in that way. If you'd like to connect with me personally or subscribe to this show, you can do all of that at toptieraudio.com. Everything from subscribing to setting up a consultation, considering working with me as an editor, or just straight up contacting me, toptieraudio.com is the place for that. Thanks again. Now go out there and make a great podcast.